I'm Archana from Edureka, and I welcome you all to this session on two most misunderstood topics in software testing, which are smoke testing and sanity testing. But before we proceed, let's go ahead and take a look at the topics which we will be talking about in today's session. So guys, we will begin this session by talking about different types of software testing types, and then we will move on to our today's topic, which is smoke testing. There we will learn what smoke testing is, why and when to perform smoke tests, and finally how to conduct some smoke tests. And then we will move on to our next topic, which is sanity testing. There we will learn what sanity testing is, how to conduct sanity tests, and finally we will end this session by discussing the key differences between smoke testing and sanity testing. So I hope agenda was clear to you guys. Let's get started then. As you guys know, today's world of technology is completely dominated by machines, and their behavior is controlled by the software powering it. Software testing is crucial because it identifies errors or bugs from a system at the beginning stage. Before software is released, it undergoes through rigorous testing. Chances are you already know this. Testing is an integral part of any successful software project. It's basically the process of executing the software or any sort of application to find out if there are any bugs or some kind of errors in it. So programmers check for any mistakes or problems in the design and the functionality of the software. Until then, the product won't be available for commercial use in the market. We have different types of software testing. The types of software testing usually depends on multiple factors like project requirements, budget, timeline, and suitability, expertise, and all that. But usually it's divided into two main types of testing, which we call functional testing and non-functional testing. So functional testing is defined as type of testing which verifies that each function of the software application that you're testing is working properly under given conditions. That's what functional testing is. Whereas non-functional testing is a testing to determine the performance of a system to measure, validate or verify quality attribute of the system, to check if the software that you've built is working properly or not. So under functional testing, we have further categories such as unit testing, integration testing, system testing, interface testing, smoke testing, sanity testing, regression testing, and acceptance testing. While explaining all this type of testing in this session is out of scope, if you want to know more, there are separate videos in the software testing playlist in Edureka YouTube channel. So go ahead and take a look. Moving on, under non-functional testing as well, we have multiple types of testing like documentation testing, installation testing, performance testing, reliability and security testing, and many more. But as for today's session, the topics that we are interested in or going to learn are smoke testing and sanity testing. So smoke testing and sanity testing are the most misunderstood topics in software testing usually. There's a lot of information available on internet on this topic, and yet most of them seem confusing. So today in this session, let's figure out what smoke testing and sanity testing are and how different they are from each other. But before we go ahead and discuss all those topics, there's a term that you should know about, which is software build. And if you don't know, that's not an issue. Let's learn what that is. So when you're developing a simple software program that consists of few lines of source code, it's easy to compile and execute. You agree with me, right? But that's not the thing which happens in real situation. Typically, a software program or application usually has hundreds and thousands of source code lines. So creating an executable program for huge source code file is really complicated and literally time-consuming process. So you need a build here to generate the executable program. So the term build is the process by which source code is converted to standalone form that can be run on any kind of system. And this complete process is known as software build and software testing. Well, sometimes the software build is also referred to as code build. Now, if you're wondering why I'm discussing here about software build, well, the term is being mentioned in the further part of the session, so I hope that you understood what software build is. Let's move on. So here we are with today's topic, which is smoke testing. Smoke testing is a kind of software testing which is usually performed after software build to make sure that the critical functionalities of your program are working well and fine. Well, it's executed before any detailed functional or any regression tests are executed on the program. The purpose here is to reject a badly broken application so that your QA team or the testing team does not waste time installing and testing the software application further. So the main objective of smoke testing is not to perform exhaustive testing, but to verify that the critical functionalities, or you can say the main functionalities of the program or the system, are working fine. Well, let's discuss a simple example. Well, if you are given a Gmail application to test, what are the important functions? Log into Gmail, compose mail, and send. Correct, right? So, for instance, if there's an error in sending a mail, does it make sense to test sent mail, drafts, folders, etc.? No, right? Which means you're rejecting the build without further testing. Smoke testing, performed on particular build, is also known as build verification test. So the main focus in smoke testing is to test the critical areas and not the final details. Here we go. I have a small depiction of smoke testing here. As you can see, we perform smoke testing on very initial builds before these builds are sent to any further testing like functional or regression testing. So let's say I have 3 builds here and one of them needs testing. It's sent to smoke test. The smoke test is performed. And if it passes, if all the critical functionalities like in Gmail, the login, compose, and send all are working, then it's sent to past builds where it's passed on for the further test like regression or functional, any other kind of test. But if you find an error, instead of checking other features, like again the Gmail example, sent mail, draft, folders, and all, the build is rejected. So that's what smoke testing is all about. You understood, right? So the main thing is here, the initial builds are tested for errors. And if there are errors, the build is rejected. If there are no errors, then the build is forwarded for further tests. Now the question here is, why smoke testing? Smoke testing is done to ensure that the critical functionalities of your program are working as expected and not concerned about the inner details. Well, that's because if the major functionality does not work, then there's no point in testing the other details. It's waste of time and effort on QA or testing team. Now, who does this smoke testing? Sometimes development team does smoke test before deploying the build to make sure that the build is good, while sometimes QA team or the testing team performs basic tests before starting the detailed testing. Now, as for typical examples which come under smoke testing, we have verification of the application if it's either launched successfully or not, or verifying the graphical user interface of application is responsive or not, or verifying if financial transactions are completed well or not. So before you move on to any other functionality, you need to check the basic functionalities of your program are working properly or not. That's the objective of smoke testing. So smoke testing basically saves time as you do not have to test the whole application if the core functionalities of the program are not working. So the primary focus will be core application workflow in case of smoke testing. So now that you know what smoke testing is, let's go ahead and see how smoke testing is actually performed. So here I have a simple example, or you can say a workflow. So to conduct the smoke testing, you do not have to write any test cases. You just have to pick the necessary test cases that are already written or defined by programmers. So your objective here is application workflow, like I said earlier. So we can pick test cases from the test suite that cover major functionalities of the software program that you are testing. For example, so assume you're working on an e-commerce site. When a new build is released for testing, as a software QA team, you have to make sure that whether the core functionalities are working or not. So what you do, you try to access the e-commerce site, add an item in your cart, and place an order. That's a major workflow in most of the e-commerce sites, right? So if the flow works, you can say this build is passed. You can move on to functional testing on the same build. So as you can see in this example, I have a release build or the initial build, and I'm selecting certain test cases from the test suite, and I'm performing smoke test on that test cases. First of all, what I'm trying to do is access homepage, check if it's working properly or not. Then the main concept here or in the any e-commerce site is to check if you're able to select the items which you want to buy and place order. That's the main functionality, right? So the workflow is checked here. So you're checking if you can place order. If you are able to place order properly, it means that your build has passed smoke testing and it move on to the next type of testing. If it is failed, then the build is rejected without any further tests. So that's how simple smoke testing is. That's all about smoke testing. Now let's move on to next type of testing, which is sanity testing. Sanity testing is usually performed after receiving a software build with minor changes in code or functionality. The main objective here is to confirm that the bugs have been fixed and there are no further issues introduced due to the new changes. Unlike smoke testing, where the main objective is to test if the core functionalities or the major functionalities of your program are working or not, the major objective of sanity testing is to determine that the developer has applied some rationality while building a software program. In sanity testing, the testers try to check if the program makes sense or not. For you guys to understand better, let's consider the same example which we did earlier, which is Gmail example. So Gmail has added a new feature called auto acknowledgement. Let's say this auto acknowledgement feature sends in written mail that email sent is delivered successfully. Now this is a new feature which is to be tested, and we already have a build that is stable. So testing the new feature is called sanity testing. So basically, in sanity testing, you're trying to see if the application makes sense. For example, let's say if you're checking a calculator application and it returns 2 plus 2 is 5. Does it make sense to go further and check other functionalities? No, right? So it doesn't make sense. Here's a diagram to depict sanity testing. So unlike smoke testing and sanity testing, the stable builds are checked for the functionalities, not the initial builds. So you need to note that here. As you can see, it's stable builds. It can be multiple builds as well. Now, if one of them is sent for sanity testing, testing is performed. And here you have two cases. If your application or if the build fails, then it's rejected. But if it passes sanity testing, then it's passed on for further testing. And that's how simple it is. The only difference is that in smoke testing, testing is done on initial builds, whereas in sanity testing, the testing is done on stable builds. And that's what is being said in the next slide. As you can see, I have build 1, build 2, build 3. These are very initial builds, and we're performing smoke tests. So basically, we are testing the critical functionalities of your application here. And if your build has failed, it's rejected immediately without passing on to any further testing. If it passes, then it's further sent to functional system or any kind of regression testing. And similarly, in sanity testing, you don't consider the stable builds. You consider moderately stable builds which have passed certain levels of regression testing. So those are sent for sanity testing. And basically, there you verify if there are any bugs or if a new feature is installed, you're checking if the feature is working properly or not. It's not a core function here. And if it passes the test, it's sent for further stages of testing, just like in smoke testing. If it fails, the build is rejected or it's added to rejected builds list. Well, there's one more thing, guys. I've been saying that sanity testing is basically you check for any errors or the new feature which you have added is working properly or not. But then you might confuse it with the regression testing. Well, there are certain cases when regression testing is not done to build due to time constraint, and sanity testing is considered more suitable to check the main functionalities. So they are slightly different. Well, you can say sanity testing is a subset of regression testing. So the next thing is, how do you implement sanity testing? It's very similar to smoke testing. Just like in smoke testing, even in sanity testing, you do not have to write any separate test cases. You just have to pick up the necessary test cases that are already written by the programmers. Now let's discuss the previous example with respect to sanity testing. Remember that the main focus of sanity testing is to initially check and validate that the planned functionality is working as expected. Well, assume that you're working on an e-commerce site and the new feature is released to registration functionality. So basically, a new feature is being added to registration functionality. So your main focus is to check if the registration function is working fine or not. So once it is tested, then move on to other major functionalities like payment flow. So basically, you check this entire thing for already logged in user. And if the workflow is properly working, then you check it for the guest user as well. So main focus here is to check if there are any bugs in the main functionality and if any new feature is added to test if the feature is working properly or not. And that's what sanity testing is. So if I have to summarize, sanity testing is required only for the necessary output. Only the change features of the product need to be tested. In-depth analysis of software functionality is not necessary in sanity testing. Well, at this point, you know what smoke testing is and what sanity testing is and how they're conducted in the real world. Now let's check out the key differences between smoke testing and sanity testing. Well, I'm comparing these two types of testings on certain major features like purpose of testing, documentation, software builds, and many others. So the first thing that we're discussing here is software builds. Well, we discussed what software build earlier is, right? A software build is the process by which source code is converted to standalone form that can be run on any system without any problem. Well, it's easy to do that on our own if you have like 10 lines of code, but you have 100 and 1000 lines of code, it's difficult to do. So that's why the software testers or developers develop a software build. Well, we already discussed this earlier. Smoke test is usually performed on initial builds. So the development usually build the software build with the core functionalities, and before it's passed on to any other testing, it's sent for smoke testing. So smoke testing is done on initial builds of software product. Whereas, as you guys know, sanity tests are usually done over builds that have passed smoke tests and many rounds of regression tests. So moving on to next functionality, what we have here is motive of testing. So what's the motive of smoke testing? We did discuss that when we were discussing what smoke testing is. Smoke testing makes sure that the core functionalities of your program are working fine absolutely. So the motive of smoke testing is to measure the stability of newly created build so that you can move on to the next round of rigorous testing. Whereas sanity testing is done to check if the new functionalities or if there are any bugs or issues are properly fixed or not. So basically in sanity testing, you don't dig much deeper. So the main objective of sanity testing is to verify the rationality and the originality of core functionalities to proceed with more rigorous testing in the future. So in simple terms, smoke testing check for the functionality of core features, whereas sanity testing you check if the bugs have been fixed and if a new feature is added, if it's working properly or not. So the next feature that we have here is what are these testing subset of? Well, like I said earlier, smoke testing is a subset of regression testing, whereas sanity testing is a subset of acceptance testing. The next feature is when you actually conduct smoke tests and when you conduct sanity tests. We did discuss that earlier as well. Smoke tests are usually conducted on availability of new builds. So as soon as development team starts providing a new build for the testing team, they start with smoke testing. Whereas sanity testing usually performed post completion of regression testing activities. So the initial builds which you get go through smoke testing, lot of smoke testing, every initial build, and if there is any error, they reject it. If not, they pass for further rounds of testing. Let's say it can be regression testing. Now, if that build has passed or successfully completed all kind of regression tests, it's passed on to sanity testing to check if the bugs are fixed properly or not. So basically, smoke testing is executed whenever new builds are available, whereas sanity testing is executed on the builds that come after a few rounds of regression testing. Moving on to next feature, documentation. Well, smoke testing involves documentation and scripting work, whereas sanity testing does not usually concentrate on any sort of documentation or scripting. Like I said, sanity testing is not very deep kind of testing, so you don't need any sort of documentation or scripting here. And since smoke testing deals with core functionalities, it's necessary that you have documented if the release build is working properly or not. And then comes the test coverage. So the smoke testing is shallow and wide approach to include all major functionalities without getting into detail. It may seem as a general type of testing covering all basic functionalities, whereas sanity testing is narrow and its deep approach involve detailed testing of functionalities and features. While it's specialized or more detail oriented testing technique that focuses on a particular functionality or a feature. Well, there are just two words to describe both the testing. Smoke testing is shallow and wide, whereas sanity testing is narrow and deep. And the last feature that we have to compare these testings are who these testings are performed by. Smoke testings are either executed by developers or testers because developers pass on the initial builds, so they test and pass it to testing team sometimes, or sometimes the testing team before they start testing for other bugs and all, they start with smoke testing. So the smoke testing is either performed by developers or testers. But whereas sanity testing is executed manually only by testers because, like I said earlier, before the builds come for sanity testing, they undergo rigorous testings like other type of testing, regression testing, functional testing and all that, and they come for sanity testing. So which is mainly done by testers. So there's no point of developers here. Another point is that smoke tests can be executed either automated approach or using manual approach, but sanity tests are usually executed manually. So that's it guys. With this, we have reached the end of the session, and I hope you have the basic knowledge of smoke testing and sanity testing by now. Well, like I said at the beginning, it's okay if you do not or you can't tell the difference among these terms because they're confusing sometimes. Terminologies are confusing all the time. However, now that you know what smoke testing is and sanity testing is, it should help you in your journey of learning software testing. Well, if you have any doubt or any comment in any part of the session, you can post them in the comment section below, and I will definitely get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you guys, and we'll meet you in the next session.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!